Every single human on earth has an endocannabinoid system because it's literally vital for your survival. The main purpose of your ECS is to really just balance out your body, which sounds kind of like woo-woo, but it is 100% part of every tissue, every organ, every cell of your body is part of this endocannabinoid system.
Welcome to Higher Spirits, a podcast of elevated cannabis conversations with me, your host, Lexi Kafkis. Here we explore the powerful intersections of cannabis, spirituality, and mindfulness to better understand how to cultivate a conscious relationship with this plant. We journey with thought leaders and experts who bring a unique perspective on how cannabis connects us deeper to ourselves, our history, and the planet. Hello, plant fam. Welcome to another episode of Higher Spirits. And today I'm super excited to introduce you to Dr. Riley Kirk, a true powerhouse, is all I can say, in the cannabis science space right now. And she's known as Cannabis Chem on socials. Riley has her PhD in pharmacognosy, which I learned during this episode is the study of natural medicines with a specific and deep focus on the cannabis. She shares her passion in research through her TikTok and Instagram accounts and her own podcast, which has become amazingly successful and wildly informative, called Bioactive. In addition to all of this, she also runs her own lab in New Hampshire and has founded a nonprofit called the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy. So basically, she defies every stigma or stereotype of stoners being lazy. And I was so excited to chat with Riley because learning about cannabis science transformed my personal relationship and perspective on the plant, making it much more spiritual and honestly mystical. See, we all have this magical internal system called the endocannabinoid system, or what we call the ECS for short, and it helps us maintain balance in our bodies. It regulates key functions like cardiovascular health, digestion, and muscle movements, and plus much, much more. And it ensures that our bodies stay in homeostasis. As we discussed in the episode, the ECS is a vastly complex system that we are just starting to understand. But at its basic level, it functions with these molecules called cannabinoids. And the most magical thing, in my perspective, is that these molecules are only found in two places: in our bodies, which we call endocannabinoids, and in the cannabis plant, which we call phytocannabinoids. So is the fact that these are the only two places we can find these molecules just a coincidence? Or are we meant to be interacting and using this plant? And this leads me to one of my favorite questions that Riley and I discuss. Did humans co-evolve with cannabis over our 12,000 plus year history on this planet? So in addition to this philosophical approach on cannabis science, we also dive into cannabis research and discuss the challenges of cannabis research. Because despite legalization efforts, cannabis still remains a Schedule I substance, classified alongside things like heroin, making it incredibly difficult to study because Schedule I means that there is no redeeming medical qualities or values to these substances. So Riley shares tips for identifying trustworthy research and explains the impact of stigma and misinformation on cannabis science, and then how it trickles down to consumers. We also touch on an important and seemingly now reoccurring topic that keeps coming up with every one of my guests: the high potency of today's cannabis products. Riley and I discuss what this means for consumers, especially young people, and the industry as a whole. And then the conversation comes to a beautiful close as Riley shares her biggest lesson from cannabis: that we are all interconnected parts of the natural world. This is a beautiful feminine perspective that we need more of to save our planet, that we are currently so disconnected from as a species and sadly destroying. And cannabis can help us embody, understand, emanate, and share this more feminine consciousness. So if you're curious about the science of cannabis, how it works in our bodies, and the current state of research in the US, you are in for a treat because Riley is a wealth of knowledge and just a generally awesome human to know. So without further ado, let's dive in and let's get higher.
Hey, how's it going, Lexi?
So good. I'm so excited to chat with you today. Really grateful that Tina and me put us in touch, and grateful for your time and for you coming on this Higher Spirits podcast. And I'm really excited to talk with you today because the spiritual side and implications in my life of cannabis really were solidified when I started to understand and learn about the science of the plant and our endocannabinoid system. And you've dedicated, it seems like, your life to studying this plant, and I'm so excited to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard not to be obsessed with your endocannabinoid system and with this plant when you really start to dive deeper into it, especially with the fact that we didn't even know the system existed in our body until, just a few decades ago. And that's very different than the other systems in our brain that we've known existed for so much longer. And especially thinking about the early days of using cannabis as medicine before we even knew about the system. I mean, talk about faith in the unknown and being able to listen to your body, because people knew that this had medicinal effects in our body and we had no knowledge of how it worked, but people still believed in it and still had that spiritual connection because it was healing them even before we didn't know how. And now that we know how, I mean, that connection, as you're talking about, can just be so much deeper because we understand our body so much better now.
Yeah. So I would love to start with clearly you have a science background. You have a PhD in biochemistry, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, it's similar world. It's actually in pharmaceutical sciences, but my specialty is in natural product chemistry, or the word is pharmacognosy, which is understanding how natural products can be used as medicine to either find new pharmaceutical drugs or just to use as complex natural formulations as they've always been used.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, we need more of this in the world. So tell us about your journey with the cannabis plant. Did you want to study this pharmacology world beforehand and then you started to fall in love with the intricacies of the cannabis plant? Or were you like a lifelong cannabis user who wanted to study the cannabis plant?
Yeah, no, I was cannabis way before I knew anything about science. I was not the kid who was like, I want to grow up and be a scientist. I was just like, man, I really love vibing with my friends and having a good time. But really, my experience with cannabis, I started using cannabis at a very young age. I guess everything's relative, but I was 14 when I first started using cannabis and have been using it consistently ever since. From essentially like that first time I used it, I was like, this makes my brain just feel at ease, like a way I couldn't really describe, but I just felt comfortable in my brain and my body. And like, I wanted that feeling more, right? Especially like when you're in high school specifically, we always talk about, cannabis potentially being bad for a developing brain. But like for me, it put my brain at ease and made me a much nicer person. It allowed me to handle those huge fluctuations in mood and hormones that we're going through at that age. I think it really helped shape my life from that period on and made me able to be able to be social and be kind to people. Like that was really important for my development. And so I went to college and I had no idea what I wanted to be in life. But, a lot of people around me were working in healthcare one way or another. And I was like, okay, maybe I went for pre-med. And when I graduated, I just took a normal kind of like lab job that you do after that. And I was like, I really just want to study nature. I want to know more about nature. I knew about herbalism. And I used a lot of medicinal herbs beyond cannabis, but I just didn't have the tools to understand how they were medicine. I didn't really understand that at all. And I tried to read the papers and I just couldn't understand what the papers were saying. So that really led me down this path of understanding that there is a way you could learn more. And it's through understanding pharmacognosy, or how plants are used as medicine, how they've traditionally been used as medicine, the different extract types that we make. And I actually went to graduate school, and during graduate school, I studied so many forms of life, from cyanobacteria to plants to fungi, to like literally every walk of life. And it was a real like eye opener, and being able to understand the complex molecules nature makes, but also understanding how special cannabis really is for its safety profile and how well it works for so many different conditions. And it all comes back to the endocannabinoid system. And especially after learning about all these other natural products and how they work in the body, cannabis is special, and cannabis is number one. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. And it's the natural product that I've been using the longest. I would not have got through grad school without cannabis. I would likely have way less friends if I didn't use cannabis because, again, it makes me a better person and really allows me to be creative and productive and be a better scientist because I can think, like, when I'm kind of stumped on a problem, I will often get like really high in front of a whiteboard and then just like start to write down my issues, and I start to work through the problem. And it really, like, it is a tool that you can use, and it's a tool that has shaped my medicine and also like shaped my friends and family, and like it really has benefited my life in such a positive way that that's my connection to the plant.
Amazing. Yeah, there's so much of this like dissonance between citizen science and like what people say versus studies. And I never know personally what to believe because like I know a lot of studies say people should not be consuming cannabis under the age of 25. It's bad for brain development. But I'm like anecdotally, I know so many people who have used cannabis early in life who it does benefit. And I never know if we should be looking at the papers and the science and the studies, or if we should just be listening to our bodies.
It's like you kind of have to use both. It's kind of like politics, where if you like listen to something like, Fox News that's super one way and, another one that's super the other way, you're not really getting a good understanding of the situation as a whole, right? And I think something that a lot of peer-reviewed publications aren't really addressing, because it's not their job to address it. Their job is to look at the objective problem and then objective data and then report the findings, right? But as humans, we can dive that in a little deeper, especially humans who have attended high school and have been that age. It wasn't like use cannabis or sit at home and read books. Like a lot of the time, the question is like, or what? Like what situations would you have been in? What people would you have interacted with? What you have said or done to your family and friends, if you didn't have this substance. And, for me, like, I like to look at it in that perspective with, if you are somebody who doesn't feel the need for cannabis at that age, then don't use cannabis. If you try it and you don't like the effects of it, don't use cannabis at that age. But for some people that need it at that age, it really is a harm reduction tool, because a lot of times the what else is significantly worse than using cannabis at a young age, which we don't even have super compelling data that it's bad.
And yeah, tell us about the state of research with cannabis and like what that means for a lot of these studies that come out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth mentioning because the state of research for cannabis, it's been really, really, really tough to research this plant. Like, I think it's easier to research psychedelics than it is to research the cannabis plant. And I think because of that, there's certain types of research that we need to take with a grain of salt, or at least understand the limitations that the researchers are under. I think the research that you can trust through peer-reviewed studies is something like, this molecule interacts with this receptor, right? They're doing studies in the lab. They're understanding, okay, this has the Ki value of this, that reports this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's objective. We see it. There are limitations, but we don't talk about this. I think the ones that have to deal with more of a societal role, that's where we're going to see a lot of the issues, because one, we cannot research cannabis that comes from the legal market. I cannot emphasize this enough. We cannot research cannabis that comes from the legal market. So if we had a grant or something to study cannabis, we would have to go through a government-approved institution that grows or cultivates cannabis and purchase one of their limited products and then use that for our studies. So it's not really representative of what people can actually purchase and use. So anything we find for medical claims out of that, that's not really that important. We want to know, with the diversity of products on the market, what are people actually using and what problems or symptoms is that actually solving, right? So that's a huge limitation. And previous to just a few years ago, there used to be only one university that was growing cannabis for research purposes. And then research came out that cannabis actually was closer to hemp than it was to like type 1 cannabis that we were actually smoking. And that led to the need for more places to be able to cultivate, which is great. That's a step in the right direction. But like, come on. If we have, thousands, millions of people using these products, I think we should be able to research them just from like the perspective of it being like a just way to research the things that are going into Americans' bodies. I think that's so important. that we have an avenue to do that research. So a lot of times in research, THC is really the limiting factor of what we can include for our tests. We can test terpenes a lot. So we'll see data start to come out more and more with like this terpene binds to this receptor, etc. But anything that's really involving like THC in any appreciable levels, it's really, really hard to study. And it usually has to go through, the parts of the government that have a lot of money. But then it's also important to think about, okay, if the government is doing studies on the cannabis community, you got kind of a bashing head here because the government has been directly inhibiting the cannabis industry and the cannabis community to having access to this medicine and has been pretty blatantly discriminating against us for decades. And then we're supposed to go take your study and participate in your research and be honest in that research. It's dangerous for us to do that under this infrastructure that they've created. I think where like a company like where we are at is we're kind of operating in the gray space between the academic institutions and a private institution because we work with academic institutions, but we are a nonprofit. We're a research and education nonprofit that really is trying to combine the rigorous biochemical data that we get in the laboratory with the experience of the consumer by just asking people, what are you already doing and what products are already working for you? How many times are you consuming a day? What products are you consuming every day? We've never actually asked consumers, like, to be honest in a survey and actually just answer what they're already doing. But really the consumers, the stoners, the regular users of cannabis, like, we are the experts on cannabis in this industry, and we should be probing our community for knowledge because there's so much knowledge that's just been lost because we haven't had a safe, secure, and trustworthy way of communicating that with researchers to spread that knowledge and spread the word of it.
Yeah. The dissonance that you're talking about of like not being able to trust, like it's the same system that's been, had prohibition and major propaganda for the past 100 years and putting people in jail is now releasing these studies and wanting us to trust them. It's totally, it's a little backwards. And then you get the pharmaceutical industry involved. And that's why I'm always wondering, I'm like, can I trust this? What's my lens? Like, do I take this with a grain of salt? There's some like concerning studies out there. I'm like, is this true? Can I believe this?
No, it is important. I mean, science is supposed to be objective, but at the end of the day, humans are at the computer writing those papers and designing those studies. So like every study is biased in some way. It's important to, read things carefully, understand funding, even like the tone. Sometimes when I'm reading papers, I will literally like send my friends screenshots because I'm like, how did this get through peer reviewed? They're like blatantly, again, discriminating through the introduction of a paper talking about cannabis and like really bashing on smokers or the cannabis community in general. And it's like, this is supposed to be an objective way of telling people about information, and it's turning political, and it shouldn't be, unfortunately. But, now there's people kind of pushing back the other way too, which I think is really important, especially in the cannabis industry. We need to be doing research within the industry. Like, we need to be doing research to make sure that we're on top of all the science and we're ready for any new regulations coming, and, that we're just showing ourselves to be educated and transparent with cannabis science as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I call this in some of my work the stigma-based mindset. And I mean, we are operating under, like you said, decades, if not more, of this stigma against the plant, and whether we're aware of it or not, it can be infiltrating our thoughts and our on a subconscious level. And I think it's really interesting, going back to what you were saying before, of that it's actually easier to study psychedelics in a lot of ways now. And I know a lot of people will kind of think of cannabis in the same world as psychedelics, but psychedelics don't have the same history and the same weight and the same stigma attached to them that this plant does. So I find it fascinating to watch them both kind of rise at similar times. But like you said, I feel like cannabis is like weighed down by all of this history that psychedelics don't really have. They're kind of seen as like, people on the fringe, the hippies, the spiritual seekers use them. but we never actively had propaganda against them or put people in jail like systematically like we did with this cannabis. But so I'm just really glad that you're honoring that in the research community, because it does feel, I see it, and I wonder what it's going to take to bring cannabis to the same level, because in my mind, it's really the people's plant. And it's kind of the gateway to these other psychedelics coming into the market in a significant way. It's like, if we can't really study and utilize cannabis, how are we going to do that with other psychedelics?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's a gateway to like your brain. It's like the gateway to kind of I don't want to say like an anarchist way of thinking, but it kind of is at least allowing you to think independently and like question things a little more, which, maybe that's part of the danger that these governing institutions are worried about. But something I think about all the time is like, cannabis is so stanky, right? It is loud. It is so smelly. And it's something that I love about the plant, what a lot of people do, and where a lot of emerging research is happening. But I always wonder, what would the like political legal status of cannabis be like if it didn't smell? Because I think a lot of the reason why it's so targeted is whether you're growing it or you're smoking it, whatever you're doing, like it's loud. Whereas psychedelics, even growing them, like you can be extremely discreet. Taking them, until you're full tripping, you can be pretty discreet. But cannabis is just not a discreet medicine. And I think that's a beautiful part about it, but it's also risked a lot of people's safety, right? It's been kind of this beacon of both, I'm a safe person, I'm smoking weed, but also like, oh my gosh, that person's over there smoking weed. Like it's definitely contributed to where it currently is at. And I just like to think of that as like an alternative universe of what it would be like if just cannabis didn't smell as much. What would life look like?
That was a super interesting metaphor. I've never thought about that. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I love this. So I was wondering if you were talking about how you've studied basically the pharmacology of a lot of different plants and how you're applying science to something that we've known for millennia, a long time. Do you study other plants or just specifically the cannabis plant?
At this very point in my life, just cannabis for the most part, although we may start like a kava kratom project soon. But right now it's really focused on cannabis just because that's where we think a lot of our initial effort and research should be, because we need so much work in cannabis and it's like a really exciting time to work with the plant. But we named our nonprofit the Network of Applied Pharmacognosy, kind of leaving yourself open to any natural product that we want to research in the future. I've been using a diversity of natural products literally since I was a teenager. And I think a lot of these products that are known for like general wellness, or especially the ones that are growing in our region that are local, we definitely want to research them a lot more, and eventually fungi too, and understanding psychedelics and getting into that space, or other sacred medicines that maybe don't get you high but are still really important to the history of medicine.
Amazing. Yeah. Again, I think it's just a gateway plant to such a different way of thinking and looking at the world. So I love that you have that broad perspective and goal.
Speaking of just like broad perspective, something I learned a lot when researching a diversity of medicinal plants was really like the power of synergies in nature. And, we call this the entourage effect in cannabis. But this sort of polypharmacology is happening in every natural product that we're making extracts out of, right? If you're making a tea out of leaves, you have a lot of polypharmacology happening. There's a lot of different molecules interacting with the body. And, I worked a lot with bacteria and how bacteria overcome resistance. And they never produce one single molecule. They never rely everything on one single molecule. Oftentimes, plants will create, a dozen or more similar molecules so that if a stressor comes into their life, they can deploy one molecule. And if that doesn't work well, maybe another one or maybe a combination. And that makes the bacteria really difficult to become resistant to because there's a lot of things present, right? And I think this is a good way of looking at cannabis too, as protecting our brain by keeping it in that really complex form. A lot of the adverse effects that we see from cannabis are coming from super high THC products. And I think that anxiety and that adverse effect that people are getting, that's your body's way of saying like, yo, this is way too much THC. Having a more balanced product, a full spectrum product, or smoking flower, vaping flower, whatever you're doing, I think it has way more protective mechanisms in our brain and our body than we even conceptualize right now. But every natural product is made in this like synergy and in this group of molecules. So I think it's important as we develop as an industry, and especially as we are now going to be competing with big pharma if the Schedule 3 goes through, keeping cannabis complex, keeping it in its really diverse and robust form, one, protects us against patenting and pharmaceutical type landscape. And two, I believe it is the most therapeutic and the most, really calming for our brain to have that diversity of molecules interacting. And I think there's a lot of lessons that nature can teach us if we kind of observe what has worked for people for centuries and try to employ that into what we're currently doing in this industry, because it still is a wellness industry. Now, we need to be looking forward to the best wellness products that we can provide that are therapeutic, but also like very safe for long-term use.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. What our masculine way of going about this world, if the more is better, we've applied that to this plant and we focus on this one molecule and we've used our crazy science brains to develop these products that are actually really far from the natural expression of the plant. I mean, the natural expression of the plant, like in the 60s when our parents were smoking, they were like, oh, it was different back in our day. Like, it really was. It was around like 5%. Yeah. I'm like, it was only 5%. I'm like, oh my goodness. And that's how I fell in love with Tina's plants in Moomig Farms, is because she was producing these really full spectrum and often low THC products that, to me, and that's what I teach with when I teach cannabis yoga, is like, that is closer to the natural expression of this plant before we got involved in all of this manufacturing business. And I completely agree. A lot of people deal with adverse effects like anxiety and paranoia because, I mean, if you think of it like drinking alcohol, like you can have a glass of wine or you can drink a glass of ethanol. And if you drink a glass of ethanol, you're probably going to feel pretty terrible.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I also fell in love with Tina's flower for the same reasons. I really enjoy the really balanced effects and being able to like smoke a full joint and just feel really, really good in your own body and, super functional and creative. I remember I shared some of her flower with some of like my best friends on 420. And after we smoked it, some of them were like, wow, I feel like really good, but I don't feel blasted. And I'm like, yeah, as I've matured, I stopped looking for a flower just to get blasted. And they're like, wow, like I need to learn more about this. And I was like, yeah, it's like a really beautiful thing once you start to really understand the different types of flower. And Tina, there's something special about that, I think, beyond the chemical profile.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's something there's something deeper and spiritual there and how she tends to her plants. Okay, I was wondering if you've already started talking about the entourage effect and terpenes and all that. Could you give us just like a TLDR high-level rundown of the endocannabinoid system? Because I think a lot of people know that we have one, but I don't think everyone really understands like the magic of how this plant interacts with our body.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So some people call it an endocannabinoid system. Some people call it endocannabinoid system. They're both right. So whatever one, you vibe with the best, use that. But every single human on Earth has an endocannabinoid system. Your dog, your cat, jellyfish, literally almost every animal on Earth has an endocannabinoid system because it's literally vital for your survival. The main purpose of your ECS is to really just balance out your body, which sounds kind of like woo-woo, but it is 100% part of every tissue, every organ, every cell of your body is part of this endocannabinoid system. So there's kind of three distinct parts of your ECS. One is receptors. So you have receptors all over your body, the cannabinoid 1 receptor and the cannabinoid 2 receptor. The CB1 receptor, the cannabinoid 1 receptor, is mostly in your brain. It's actually one of the most abundant receptors in your brain. And that's what THC binds to. So that's how that molecule makes you feel elevated. But you also have other receptors that are part of the system. Then you have molecules that are part of the system, and these are called endocannabinoids or endocannabinoids. These molecules are produced within your body endogenously. That's where the endo comes from. And then cannabinoids, because they're from the cannabis plant. And your body is synthesizing these to use on the receptors, and then it's going to break them down. So the third part of the system is the enzymes that are synthesizing these molecules and then breaking them down. But really, what's the most magical part about the system, and the reason we just cannot survive without it, it works in the opposite way of all the other systems in your body. And that's how it works to regulate your other systems. So I like to use the example of seizures as an example here because I have seizures. It's part of the reason why my brain reacts so well to cannabis. But seizures are a state of overactivity in your brain. It's sending too many signals, so that's making your brain overactive and uncomfortable and eventually can lead to a seizure. The reason why some cannabinoids are so great for seizures is they can activate the system in the brain, which can stop some of those signals from being sent, which can help bring regulation and balance, which makes you no longer have a seizure. It's the same thing with something like chronic pain, where if your body is sending too many pain signals when there's nothing painful happening, that's dysregulation in your brain. So using cannabis can help activate your ECS, which can help stop some of those pain signals from actually reaching your brain and saying, hey, you're in pain. So it can help with pain by literally stopping some of those pain signals. And this is why cannabis is so good for such a diversity of things, which we really don't see in other medicines. You know, if we're like, oh, I'm having appetite issues. Oh, try cannabis. I can't sleep. Try cannabis. Oh, I have a lot of chronic pain. Oh, have you tried cannabis? You know, I have anxiety. Cannabis. There's so many different things that cannabis is good for because it activates this master regulatory system in your body. So this system, the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, it was, as I kind of mentioned earlier on this episode, it wasn't discovered until just a couple decades ago because we didn't really know anything about it. It's a fat signaling system, so it uses fatty molecules. I mean, if you've ever touched reclaim or resin, you know that cannabis is really fatty. And our own body is producing fatty cannabinoids as well. So it's really hard to research fats, and we didn't even know we had a fat signaling system until we discovered the ECS. But there's a million unique things about this system, and it really is amazing that every single organism requires an ECS to function because you always need a system of checks and balances to survive. Or if you had some dysregulation, it could just kill you if you had no system to turn on and be like, yo, we're out of balance. So just a reminder, if you never smoke weed, if you never smell the cannabis plant or touch it, you still have an ECS. It's still going to be functioning. It's still going to be operating. And we can keep talking about the ECS. I'll stop ranting on that specific question.
No, I love it. I love it. I'm equally as fascinated by it. Like I said, when I learned about this system however many years ago, it was, the first thought that came to my mind is there's only two places on the planet, right? If that produce these cannabinoids. It's within our system, like you said, endogenously, and it's the phytocannabinoids in the cannabis plant. My esoteric mind, I'm like, have we co-evolved with this plant? Have we been using it for so long that our bodies have developed a system to work with it? I know that's a theory. In the psychedelic community, they talk about the ape theory, that we kind of co-evolved.
Stone ape theory.
Yeah, just stone.
I love it.
And I think I've heard this theory a lot in the cannabis community too, that we've co-evolved with this plant from so many millennia of using it. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I always find this topic really interesting because I do think, I think there is an element of coevolution because we have been using this plant for medicine and textiles and cultivating it for so long. But do I think the ECS in our body was originally developed because we found this plant? No, but I do think how a lot of medicinal drugs in nature, how they're produced and how at least we think what's happening is essentially insects and plants started co-evolving with each other very, very, very early on in the universe, way before us, right? It was really insects and plants that ruled the planet. So the plants or the insects would try to eat the plants, and then the plants would start producing molecules to deter them. So whether it was against insects or it was against something else that was eating them, the cannabis plant or any plant is going to be producing molecules to either make them taste bitter or just to deter their deter these things in some way. So I think that the cannabis plant originally started producing these molecules to deter other things like insects, but our brains aren't that different from insects in a lot of ways. I mean, we're obviously way more complex, but if you look at the general machinery in our brains and the general receptors and pathways, they're really, really similar to something like an insect. And I think over time, that system already was established. But as humans started to interact with cannabis and learned about, oh, when we heat this up, it turns into other things, that's when I think our ECS started to really co-evolve with this plant and maybe change in ways that other animals don't have the same receptor distribution or like affinity for specific molecules in the plant. So I think it was kind of a combination of both.
Fascinating. But yeah, I think it's just taking a moment to honor how long we have been using this plant for. And like you said, in how many different ways. I think sometimes we lose sight of that because it's a new emerging industry.
And oh my God, nothing drives me crazier. It's like, even talking about the safety, it's like now in 2024, we want to question the safety of cannabis. Like, people have been using this for literal just centuries, millennia. Like, we have been around this plant for so long. And if we have safety concerns, it's literally from what we're doing, adding solvents and concentrating it to the extent that it's no longer a plant. It's just a single molecule. And that's on us. That's not on the plant. Like, that is our fault. We're the ones manipulating it and making it to this new, level of potentially dangerous if we are increasing the concentrations to dangerous levels. Everything's dangerous in too high of a concentration. You can die from drinking too much water. Like, we need to be careful with any product that we're putting in our body and making sure that, we're taking in safe amounts of it and that we have a good relationship with it.
Yeah. So much to learn. But yeah, we go back to the roots, guys. Come back to our roots. Are there any discoveries that you've made in your research that have really surprised you as you've gotten more into the science of the plant, or maybe not even that you or your team have researched, but in general, things that science has revealed about the plant that you've just been amazed?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So we have some really, really, really cool projects we're working on. There's a couple they're not published yet, so I have to be a little bit careful of exactly what I say. But one of the projects we're working on is identifying a new enzyme that's in the plant that may contribute to why we smell things in certain ways after harvest. So that's something I'm really excited to talk about. Some of the coolest research that's not ours, I think, is from Abstract's Tech when they're identifying all of these new smelly molecules in cannabis that they've deemed the flavorants. Have you heard about this research before?
Is this flavonols?
No, this is different. This is really, really cool. This is groundbreaking stuff. So they're out of California, and this research lab called Abstract's Tech essentially noticed if you're smelling the two different strains and they have the quote same terpene profile, they smell really different still, right? Like it's just not the terpenes alone that are contributing to that. So they said, okay, let's look into this a little deeper. And they found that there's essentially way more molecules contributing to the aroma of the flower than just the, 10 terpenes that we test for in a testing lab. So they've named this new category of smelly molecules the flavorants. And if we think of our really exotic varieties of cannabis, like the Tropicana sulfurs or ones that smell really poopy or earthy, these are actually from new types of molecules that we didn't know existed in cannabis, but they do, and they highly contribute to the unique smells that we're smelling from each different variety. So I think that's some of the coolest research, because I think we're going to see some of those compounds on COAs or, cannabis varieties being bred specifically to produce these unique smelly molecules. So that's a really cool project that I think that research just continues to amaze me. And then something that I think I can talk about with our research that isn't necessarily about the plant, but something I'm super interested in is just learning about the cannabis community more. And we had one of our initial surveys, we had about 7,000 people that were participating in it. And some of the numbers that we were finding that kind of represent the cannabis community, it was saying 91% of people on this survey were daily cannabis consumers. to a lot of people within this community, we're like, duh, like, yeah, if you like smoke weed, you usually smoke weed every day, or, it's just very, very common. But for a lot of people, they've never seen that number before, any number like that represented. And just the positive comments that we got back, like, this is so validating for me to have this communication tool to talk to my doctor or my parents or my friends and be like, a lot of people use cannabis, use it every day. A lot of people use it more than 5 times a day. 64% of people use cannabis and thrive. These numbers that maybe some people find scary, but they aren't scary because they're really not correlated with like motor vehicle accidents or increases in motor vehicle accidents. So I think really some of the cool data that we're collecting is representing the daily cannabis consumers in this positive light and kind of sharing within the community that you're not alone if you are medicating 5 times a day. You're not alone if you're using cannabis and driving or using, whatever you're doing. It's just part of our normal day lifestyle. And I think using the data that we get as advocacy to make sure that people do have workplace accommodations and, tools for communication, things that you might not even think we need in this industry. Like, we don't need to quantify that. But we do need to quantify that, and we do need to publish it, and we need to make sure that it's out into the world so that people can reference that later and understand that we are a unique population of people that have never been studied under a positive lens, or at least a relatively unbiased lens. We're always just presented as those drug abusers over there that use a lot of cannabis,
Yes, I think that's it. I can imagine that being so validating and allowing a lot of people to step more into their truth and their authentic self and come out of the quote unquote cannabis closet.
Exactly. Green closet.
Yes, exactly. Because I think a lot of people are still, I even catch myself in that, and adds perfect timing.
Figured why not?
Yeah, I love that. The community-based research. I haven't really actually thought about the societal consequences of that. And that's super beautiful. I'm really happy that you're conducting that.
Yeah, honestly, we didn't know really about any kind of societal consequences either. It was really when we started talking about it online, and like the comments, the emails, the feedback that we were getting, we were like, holy shit, this isn't just like a little project anymore. Like, this is changing people's lives. And then, that also just changes your relationship with the data and, making sure that however that data is represented, we need to be very, very responsible with what we're doing with that data to make sure it's not misconstrued and, the wrong way. And this goes back to trusting the researchers, and people want to take part in surveys and studies when they know that the researchers aren't going to misrepresent their data in the wrong way, and better yet, that they're actually contributing to a positive narrative about daily cannabis consumption, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many potential benefits of it. One thing that I wanted to ask about, and you mentioned it briefly, which I think is so beautiful, that cannabis has helped you with your seizures. And I know it's a kind of the study of the plant on epilepsy has been a huge way to advance the legalization of the plant in a lot of ways. What are some of the, we'll say, exciting therapeutic benefits that you see for the plant either now or in the near future?
Yeah, so something that I think we're going to see a lot more research on, which I'm really excited about. Have you heard of clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, or CED?
I have. Yeah. So I don't know how to identify if you have it or not, but I have heard about, the symptoms of it.
Yes. So it's essentially a theory that was originally published on by Dr. Ethan Russo. And it was essentially saying, hey, there's this subset of treatment-resistant conditions. So IBS, fibromyalgia, migraines, and I think there's a couple others that are mentioned. And because they're really treatment-resistant, but cannabis helps these people so much with their symptomology, that it's thought that these people might be producing lower levels of the endocannabinoids, which is making these symptoms flare. These are all really chronic conditions that are flaring. And we know that your ECS fluctuates throughout the day, and it seems to be relatively in line with the symptom fluctuations of these conditions. So it's thought because these people don't produce enough of their endocannabinoids, if they supplement their body with the phytocannabinoids, so like THC, CBD, CBG, these different molecules from the plant, it can help restore balance in their body. And then it essentially is like fixing, like supplementing their body with these molecules that their body's not producing enough of. I think we're going to see a lot of the medical conditions that we have listed in a lot of different states, the qualifying medical conditions. I think they're going to be linked back to clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. And that I think what you're talking about, we don't have a way to test it right now, at least not accurately. And I think we're going to see more of those tests coming out so that at least we can monitor when people are producing less of them, or we can at least start to monitor like certain conditions or certain times of the day and start to really predict when these important dosing times might be, and just understanding what the symptoms look like and in women and men and different, weights of people, and really just starting to understand how to identify it and how to identify when people could benefit from cannabis, way earlier.
Yeah. I have been endlessly curious about the testing of the endocannabinoid system. I work with a gut microbiome company. They're one of my clients, and I think microbiome testing is also on like this like frontier, and we're closer than we are endocannabinoid systems, but still it's this like mass amount of data that we have yet just to truly understand. And I am so interested and curious of like, how close are we to being able to test your endocannabinoid system? I know there's a few companies who are doing it, but from what I've understood, it's like not nearly like ready to be trusted, really.
No, I would not currently trust what's on the market, what's available for testing.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to sell that the product is like, ready to go, but I just don't think we have the data or even understand like how often we should be testing, what we're testing, so I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's very possible we can get there. But I think we need to think of it a little differently than what I've been seeing any of the other companies doing. I won't get into too much detail of what I think we need to do, but I think right now, like the best we can do is just monitor like how we feel and our symptoms, and then use that to figure out how to use cannabis. And I think it's important too, like we can supplement our ECS without using THC, right? And especially if we talk about something like seizures, the reason why like CBD works so well for seizures is it's actually hitting on a different receptor called the GPR50 receptor. And that's been known to help with seizure activity, and CBD acts pretty strongly on this receptor. But I think the reason why we're kind of still far along in understanding these ECS testing things yet, I think the reason why we don't have great data on cannabis medicine as a whole, and kind of how we don't know that much about our own body, is we never look at things as networks of interconnected things. We always try to look at things like A plus B equals C, like very linear. And when we're dealing with the ECS, and when we're dealing with a really complex medicine like cannabis, interacting with our really, really complex bodies, we need to broaden the way that we're doing research, because this is so complicated. I cannot express the level of complexity that we're talking about when 500 molecules from the plant are interacting with these different receptors in our body. Different molecules from the plant, multiple can hit on one receptor. One can turn it off, one can turn it on, one can partially block it. Like, there's so much happening here from a pharmacological level. We don't really have the tools to understand that level of complexity yet. And I think we need to be honest to ourselves as researchers on what claims we can make with this level of complexity. And that's why we think researching the population of people is so important right now, along with doing that biochemical data. But, people are going to be really the only tool we have right now to report that level of complexity. And we can keep doing the stuff in the lab, but it's not going to represent the complexity of that human experience with this plant, maybe forever, or at least not anytime soon. Like, we need to develop a lot crazier tools to understand that. And then you get into like the spiritual aspect, and you're like, will we ever be able to quantify that? Probably not. So there's different levels.
Maybe AI can.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited. I think we're going to see a lot of breakthroughs. I'm super glad that you brought up that the endocannabinoid deficiency. When I first learned about that, I was like,
And it makes so much sense too. Like we use that same lens when we're talking about something like using SSRIs or like, drugs like Lexapro, but we didn't really think of that as, our own system in our body and how cannabis can be supplementing that. There's also other like drug targets in the body, like those enzymes I was talking about that build the endocannabinoids and break them down. That's like a new pharmaceutical drug target, because if we can stop the enzyme from breaking down our endocannabinoids, that means they'd stay longer in our brain and maybe have a sort of positive effect. But, then you could also argue, like, why not just use cannabinoids instead of that? But, who knows? Maybe we'll see a drug that's produced from that someday.
Yeah, super interesting. I would love to ask you a personal question. What do you think you've learned the most from the cannabis plant? How has it been a teacher in your life?
Oh my God, I think about this all the time. Me too. I don't think about like specifically being a teacher, but I've always thought about cannabis as a guide in my life of like, because I've always used cannabis. I mean, since I was like 14, as I mentioned, it has been a staple in my life and literally like guiding me towards the right friends or the right jobs or like, and just you notice some pretty miraculous things happen when you start to follow your medicine and follow your path. And a lot of people think of that in like a negative light. I've always thought of it in a positive light. But what is my biggest like lesson that I've learned from cannabis? Probably to just straight up be yourself all the time, which I know sounds really cliche. But a lot of my opportunities I've gotten in academia, working with the cannabis plant, or even after in the industry, have been from me just being a straight up stoner. And I've always been a stoner, like just straight, like I talk like one, I walk like one, I look like one. And, when I was in grad school, I was studying all these other medicinal plants, but obviously like heavily using cannabis. And then when the opportunity came up to, help teach the cannabis course that they were offering through the university, they were like, oh, well, obviously Riley's going to help with this. Like she literally is weed. So it was like, awesome, like great opportunity just because I've never hit it. And I know that's like a privilege and a luxury that a lot of people don't have, which, I'm thankful all the way back to like my parents raising me and not seeing cannabis as a negative and like presenting it as shouldn't say positive, but neutrally at least. But for me, it has been relatively safe for a lot of the time. And just being able to be an outspoken advocate for the plant throughout my life and my career, I think she's really helped me in bringing these opportunities, because I am pretty loud about my love for the plant. And I think I do her a lot of justice by being loud. So I'm super thankful for the opportunities that I've got from just representing the community of people that really utilize her medicine.
Yeah. Thank you for being so outspoken. It's really brave. I think it's really radical to actually be outspoken about cannabis. I mean, yeah, really thankful that that it's a privilege to be able to be, but it's also radical. It takes a lot of bravery. So I just want to honor you for that. It's like you said, when we jumped on, it's not easy. Nothing about working with this plant or being open about it is easy. It's not the easy path. So
no, and like we face so much discrimination for it still. Like it is, the hurdles in cannabis are so high. I mean, right now, because we're a nonprofit, like we're trying to just release things like merch and just things to like help our company stay afloat. And every processing company has shut us down, and we're like, we're not even selling weed, we're just selling shirts. Why is this a problem? And then it's like, yeah, you look at our digital footprint and there's a lot of weed involved, and that that's involved in these decisions at these companies, but it's not worth being quiet over. But it definitely makes those hurdles higher. And you also see, and I fully understand why people aren't that loud about it, because a lot of people can't financially afford or like socially afford the consequences of being this loud.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will continue to be loud with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's always worth it at the end of the day. But yeah, I have to remember not to be a little less loud in airports, because whenever I'm traveling, I mean, my God, I've been in the stickiest situations in airports because I don't even think about
wearing like weed.
Yeah, literally, one time I wore a sweatshirt with a huge weed plant on the back, and I was like, Oh no. So like, going through security, I like went down to my tank top because I was like, can't wear this through. So just, and it like accidentally having weed on me because I just have it in like every pocket of everything. And like you get to your final destination and you're like, whoa, I'm glad I didn't know about that.
Yeah, like, oh, it's definitely happened to me. I'm like, oh, okay, it was straight in my pocket. That's cool.
Just, uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, amazing. Well, we're coming to a wrap of our time, but I have one more question
Oh, hit him. I'm good.
because I think our souls have been chosen to come to this planet in these bodies at this time, and it's a crazy ass time to be a human, right? Like,
It is.
a lot is happening, and a lot of it's really scary. Like our global warming and our care for the planet is a serious, serious concern. Like chronic illness is skyrocketing. We are very, very sick. Loneliness is a huge epidemic. Anxiety and depression and mental illness. Like we're just seeing these waves of like really serious concerns for the human species, but a lot of these can potentially be helped by the cannabis plant. So I would love to know, what role do you think cannabis can play in kind of elevating consciousness and helping society at large?
Yeah, I think one of the most beautiful ways that cannabis can help with this is like making us feel like we are part of nature and not a separate entity. And, I've been talking about how cannabis is a really complex natural product and how we're really complex creatures as well, because we are nature, right? And we should have an inherent right to use nature too, which I won't get into that. But I think understanding that we are nature and that we need to protect our environment. We need to protect our right to grow these plants, and just not forgetting that connection is really important. I mean, cannabis is a natural plant that we have co-evolved with, and I think a lot of the mental health issues that we're seeing, a lot of the health in general issues, is because we're separating ourselves more and more and more from the natural world, where we're kind of forgetting that we are part of this ecosystem. And I think either growing cannabis or at least like using cannabis in an outdoor setting, same with psychedelics, you feel so much more natural. You feel like you are part of this system, and that when you smell pine trees and you smell the pinene and you smell other flowers, and then you also smell cannabis, and you see, a woodchuck eating your cannabis plant, you're like, I get it, man. Like, you just want to bite. You just understanding that we are all interconnected. I think using cannabis in outdoor settings can really bring up that level of spirituality and your connection with nature, or even just like doing crafts and like doing something, breathing fresh air, just making sure you're kind of stepping away for a second to realize that it is an amazing time to be alive. And we are we talk about the world's dying all the time, but a lot of the world's alive and living and thriving. And you should go see it. It's really cool, and just not always focusing on the negative, but trying to find positives in nature and, learning something new in nature. There's always something to learn. And I've always been a proponent that learning is more fun when you're using cannabis as well, when you can really make a game of it and be more hands-on. So, just being playful and really embracing that inner child within you to go play outside and go play with your friends and go do things that bring you just legitimate joy. Don't worry about how society thinks about you. Don't think about TikTok. Don't think about anything. Just go play and have fun. I think that component of cannabis medicine is so underrated. And especially when you're outside and you can build a sandcastle or a fort, you can smell things, you can touch things, be a kid and go play outside, and it'll increase your that connection you have with nature so much. And I think that alone is so healing. And you don't need to be in the middle of a forest. You can be walking down the street and just see someone's beautiful garden in their yard, or just see a planter pot and appreciate it. Learn to appreciate the small things. You don't need to go to Yosemite to enjoy nature. It's all around you. Just, pay attention to it.
Yes. Yes. Connecting to nature, more play. I think these are some of the key pillars to building a more sustainable future. So
More play.
More play. Yeah. And if cannabis does anything and helps us play, absolutely, and get into that childlike state of just wonder and enjoyment. I am so grateful that we've gotten to talk about all of this. And you are such a wealth of information. I feel like I could dive into just like each one of the things that we talked about and do a whole podcast episode.
Yeah, I could talk forever. This is so fun.
I would love to know how we can support you. You have an amazing Instagram account, Cannabis. I hope everyone who hears this follows. I recommend it to people on the reg. Anyone who asks me science questions, I'm like, I can answer it, but she can really answer it. And I would love to know how to support your nonprofit.
Cool. Yeah. So if you want to support the nonprofit, you can head to appliedpharmacognosy.org, which is kind of terrible to spell, but it's applied and then PHARMACOGNOSY.org. And honestly, part of the reason why pharmacognosy is in our name is it essentially means natural product chemistry. So before we had like what we currently think of as pharmaceuticals, like synthetic drugs, all we had was nature, like plants and fungi and bacteria, just natural products. So pharmacognosy is like the OG pharmaceutical sciences that only focuses on nature, which is kind of cool. We've now greatly evolved from there, and we have like whole industries apart from that. But that's where the word pharmacognosy comes from. So you can go to appliedpharmacognosy.org. And then I also have a podcast called the Bioactive Podcast, where I talk about some mostly cannabis, but I sprinkle in some other natural products and how they work in the body. And then you can follow me on TikTok and IG and YouTube under the username Cannabichem.
You do it all. I'm so impressed with how much you have accomplished and get done seemingly on a daily basis. Anyone who says stoners are lazy, I'm like, just go look at Riley. Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was awesome.
Don't forget to subscribe to support this plant-powered exploration. And if you have any questions, are curious, or have ideas for collaborations, give me a follow on Instagram at @HigherLexi. I also want to remind you that we're not making any medical recommendations or claims on this podcast. And if you do choose to explore cannabis, please do so mindfully. And until next time, keep the vibe high, friends.